All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
And welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics. This week we want to jump right in to our interview because we have one of the most active senators in the entire state joining us. Senator Mike Kehoe, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on today.
Speaking of being active, you're in Senate leadership, and you guys have actually started churning out bills already. Can you give us an update on the first few weeks in the Senate?
Yeah, I think we've had a very productive first few weeks. Some of our priority bills, ethics legislation, municipal court reform, those have all kind of worked their way through the Senate. We've been in the middle of several other conversations that we're trying to move some legislation that we think will make a difference in Missourians' lives. So Senate leadership and the Senate is working together. You know, the Senate is not as partisan as maybe the House is, and I think you're seeing that in some of the votes come out on some of these bills.
Sometimes the Senate, because of that bipartisan nature, works a little slower. You guys have seemed to turn out legislation this year. Was that a strategy going in, or?
It's, slower is by design. The one thing I really respect and quite honestly like about the Senate is that people have their opportunity to debate and issues are debated and items get worked through on the floor. There was a large issue that we just finished up this week with the TANF benefits that Democrats and Republicans worked through various issues to make that program better, not to cut that program, but to redirect resources in areas that's needed for Missouri's working poor across the state. And it was an interesting process to watch. It took about 2.5 days, but at the end of the day, we worked through it, and I think a pretty good product will come out of it.
One of the things you've been very active in, of course, your background is being an auto dealer. Right. Anybody in Jeff City knows Mike Kehoe's name. If they don't know you from the Senate, they know you from being an auto dealer. Walk us through where the issue is with the franchise law right now. What's been happening the last few weeks? Can you explain that to our viewers?
Sure. Missouri since 1980 has had a Missouri franchise law that new and used car dealers have had to follow. It's a state statute established that Department of Revenue would normally enforce. It says if you want to be a car dealer, here's what you have to do. You have to be bonded. You have to have a facility. You have to do these things. And it's really a consumer protection piece. A couple of years ago, a kind of new to the market, new technology, new way to distribute cars, a company called Tesla out of California, came to the market and they went to Missouri and asked for a dealer's license to be able to sell their cars. They didn't fit any of the parameters under the franchise law, but for some reason, Governor Nixon and the Department of Revenue issued them a dealer license. And what Missouri auto dealers are saying is, well, wait a minute. For the last 40 years, we've complied with the Missouri franchise law. Now there seems to be a new tier developed specifically just for one company, and that's not a level playing field.
Let me ask you a question. I think we all know the auto dealers sponsor Little League teams. They're very recognizable in the community. What is the role of an auto dealer from when a car rolls off the assembly line till you buy it? What does that auto dealer do?
Well, sure. The biggest thing is what they offer is that customer service and that interaction with that customer, so that when the customer goes and looks for the car, they have a place to trade a car in. They have a way to test drive a car. They have a way to take delivery of that car where all the features are explained to them. And most importantly, if there should be a problem with that car, or even if they're in an accident or something like that, they have a location to come back to where that person's name is on the building, that person's involved in the community, that person goes to church, plays soccer with their kids. That is somebody that's not going to just go away overnight. They're going to protect their reputation, and in doing so, they're going to make sure that the manufacturer's car that they sold is taken care of to the customer no matter what it takes.
We've had some legislators on this very program, and they've discussed, it's a law that Governors Bond, Ashcroft, Carnahan, Holden all enforced as law. Now you have a Governor Nixon that's taking a different track. Is it not a little bit of a legislative sanctity issue? When you pass a law, don't you believe the governor's going to enforce that law? And if they can pick and choose, what if they don't want to enforce the TANF changes you made? What if they choose not to do it?
Well, this governor has chosen, and it's a matter of fact, there's been many laws that he decides to enforce or not enforce, manipulate, interpret different ways. His Department of Revenue has been incredible in how they've interpreted various tax laws that they try to enforce onto businesses. And sometimes we're having tax audits where we're all of a sudden changing tax policy in the middle of it. So it's not just the franchise piece, to your point, it's multiple different pieces this administration has chosen to interpret in different ways that are very outside of the box. Let me just say that.
What are some ways, I know you've had Amendment 10 last year, what are some ways you've done as you've been in the Senate to start blocking that and forcing the laws to forcing the governor to enforce the laws as you pass them?
Right. Well, Amendment 10 was a big step. It gives Missourians the protection that any governor, current or future, Democrat or Republican, can't use Missouri's budget to, wage war with different pieces of the Missouri community. I can't withhold on education money just to take those same educators a few months later to work for me and agree to release some of their money to help me fight a certain issue. He's using different groups as political pawns. And what Amendment 10 would say is that the legislature has the right to overturn his decision should he veto or withhold on some of these budget issues.
And I understand you're going to pass the budget earlier this year to try to be able to do that during session.
Right, and that's another protection. And I know later you'll have Ryan Silvey. Senator Silvey knows more about the budget than most people in that building. And on the House side, we have some great budget hawks. They're going to work together to craft the budget earlier so that the governor has the 15 statutory days to review it and then make any vetoes he might make and still give us time to still be in session and maybe correct any actions that the governor tries to withhold on.
Just a couple more quick things on the franchise law. The company Tesla has been the one that did get the dealer license, but I guess the question would be, some folks are trying to pitch it as the state's against anti-innovation. There's some people that don't want to see things progress. Can you address the issue of folks that maybe want to dump on the fact that you're anti-electric car or technology?
Every manufacturer, I'm a little partial to Ford, has electric cars you can go in the showroom and buy today. GM, Ford, Honda, there's all kinds of electric cars. Every dealer in the state of Missouri has a website where you can buy a car over the internet if you want to. So it's not internet shopping, it's not electric cars. It's the fact that there's a standard set to be a franchise dealer, and if you want to follow that dealer, it was established as a piece to protect the consumers back in the 80s. Everybody should be on the same page. And we just think that when Tesla does that, it takes away the spirit of what's been happening here in Missouri. And as we said, those are the local dealers who are protecting the consumers, and that you have a face to go to that are going to help you with that vehicle.
Now, speaking of Tesla, did they have a plan to install some of these dealerships and service centers here in Missouri?
Well, they just came out with a report, interestingly enough, the Securities and Exchange Commission report that they filed on their own, that in black and white said they have no plans to have service centers in Missouri. They do not have the ability to build service centers near where their customers are buying these cars. So they admit that they're not going to be able to service these vehicles. And I think that, consumers might think they're getting a great deal by buying factory direct, but actually what's happened is consumers paying full list when you buy factory direct. The dealer's the one who makes that price competitive. And then the dealer's the one that's able to follow up should there be a recall. How do we know that a seatbelt malfunction isn't going to happen in a Tesla? It's happened in all manufacturers' cars. It'd be nice to be able to go to your local dealer to have a safety recall done versus putting your car in a flatbed truck and shipping it up to Chicago.
Now, obviously, this has become a thing with some auto dealers versus Tesla, but this is not something, if another car dealer, Tesla is very highly backed by the federal government. What if there's a company that's not as well-heeled as Tesla that comes in the market? Right.
Well, the first, to your second point is, every Tesla you see on the road, $30,000 of taxpayer subsidies went to that car driving down the highway. So when you see one go past, make sure you own a piece of that car. It might be the taillight or the roof, but you own something in there. And so it's important to remember that when you talk about that, taxpayer subsidies and the things that go along with the cars that Tesla is producing, not everything is above board and on the table.
But take Tesla off this. If this was a different car manufacturer that came in and didn't want to follow this law, would the auto dealers have the same issue? Would you be in the same fight?
Well, that's the larger concern. When you talk about the bigger policy issue, there may be a manufacturer, that we don't even know of right now over in China, ready to produce 200,000 cars a year and come over and distribute factory direct without going through the franchise. And I think you start to create a problem there because dealers represent Missouri jobs. There's 20,000 Missourians who work for car dealers across the state. They have a footprint. There's 380 locations. And when you start selling factory direct, you skip all those jobs, and I would argue put a lot of those jobs at jeopardy, and then you put the consumer protection piece at jeopardy as well.
Just to be clear, though, if there was another manufacturer that wasn't Tesla that came in and wanted to sell in Missouri and not abide by this law, would you be opposing that as well?
Absolutely. Well, because we've been abiding by the same franchise law since 1980. So it's not just about Tesla. It's anybody who wants to come and do that. We don't think that's the right way to do it. And it's interesting, the manufacturers, Ford, GM, Chrysler, they're in and we normally don't always agree, the Dealer Association of Manufacturers, they agree with us on this issue because it needs to be a level playing field.
Let's say the Senate and the House pass a piece of legislation that gets rid of it and the governor signs it. You may oppose it, but would you abide by that law when it was passed?
Yeah, if it was a level playing field for everybody, I think Oliver Association would be happy to go along with it.
Skipping to another thing, after you buy the car, you're on the road. You've been a leader in transportation issues. You put forward a plan. You've been known as a doer. The plan didn't work out. Where I think other people now seem to be coming to the realization that we have infrastructure needs in the state. Are you hearing from other folks? Are you hearing people ideas?
Oh yeah, it's a daily conversation for me, and it happens 10 times a day. I put a plan forward because when I ran for office, Missourians, I think, and people across the country are sick of politicians who know there's a touchy issue out there but are afraid to address it because the answer to it may not be popular. And the answer to fixing transportation funding is probably not the most popular thing, especially for a conservative Republican to talk about. But people don't want elected officials to just duck on these things. We've got to get the tough issues out on the table and see how we can move forward. Missouri's transportation system at 34,000 miles of roads and 10,400 bridges is the 7th largest in the country, but our funding is the 43rd in the country. So that recipe does not work to keep our roads and bridges maintained and safe for our families to what Missourians deserve. And we have to figure out a way to put funding into that system. This is a department that is not just has an unsatiable appetite like some government entities. This is a Department of Transportation's funding has gone down by 75% in the last 8 years due to decreased revenues from gas taxes, due to decreased revenues from the federal government. The National Federal Trust Fund is broke, and so Missouri is not getting its share of those dollars anymore. And going forward, it's getting very scary to try to keep the program intact.
Well, with roads, you're actually building something too. You create a job to build that road, and then when you're done, something's there the public can use.
Well, the job, Amendment 7, obviously was not well liked by Missourians and all, but it would have created over 10,000 jobs a year for 10 years for highway construction projects around. And to your point, that is an asset then is owned by the state. It's something you can touch and feel, and it's there. And I think that's important for Missourians to know that when we come up find a solution to fund transportation, and we will, these are to build assets the Missourians will own, the state will be able to have.
Last topic, looking to 2016. The Republican Lincoln days are next weekend. The party's in a form of change. When you look at the governor's race and the state ticket, are you happy? Are you pleased? Do you think it's set yet? Do you think they can compete? The Democrats traditionally win a lot of these statewide races. Is the Republican Party getting their house in order to compete?
Well, I think there's a lot of moving pieces, and you're seeing a lot of people positioned for different seats in the statewide ticket, and I believe the Republican Party will be ready. I think that Missourians connect with the message that we carry with better tax policies and more conservative Missouri traditional values, and I believe we will be ready, but like anything, it's a process, and we're in the beginning part of that process, so I think you'll see the deck chairs get reshuffled quite a bit.
Speaking of the deck chairs being reshuffled, you've been mentioned from everything as a potential gubernatorial candidate, Secretary of State, Lieutenant Governor. If you had to make a decision today, are you leaning towards something? Are you in a consideration process?
Well, my wife just wants me out of the house, so that's the first step. But, I'm a doors open kind of guy. If I see that there's a door open and it makes sense for my family and for the citizens, I'll take a look at it. But it's not something that I just dream about every day running statewide, because it's an effort. You've got to go out and work hard to earn Missourians' trust. I think I could do that. And so as as that shuffling goes forward, we'll keep an eye on what might make sense. And at the end of the day, if none of them do, I'm fine with that too.
But the door's not closed.
The door is definitely not closed.
Senator, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet.
You're here first, folks. One of the most active senators in the state. We'll be right back with our opinion maker panel to discuss the senator's comments and other things going on in Missouri politics after this.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association, the heart of Missouri.
And welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics. It's now time for our opinion maker panel. We're joined this week by former state auditor Susan Monte, representative from West St. Louis County, Shamed Dogan, his first term, Senator Gina Walsh from here in St. Louis County, and Senator Ryan Silvey, one of these. We had an active senator on earlier. We have maybe the second most active senator in the body on with us, and Senator Silvey. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to start with you. You just heard your colleague, Senator Kehoe, talk about several topics. What jumped out to you?
The Tesla thing is kind of interesting. What that fight is happening across the country in the various states and kind of how it's playing out here. And, the technology that's involved, the models of sales that are involved. And, as far as I'm concerned, I think everybody needs to play by the same rules. If we need to have a debate on what those rules are, I think that's appropriate. But until we have that, I think everybody needs to play by the same rules.
Senator Walsh, I'd really be interested in your opinion on this. I think he makes an interesting point. There's rules that are set up. If you want to change them, that's your prerogative as a legislator.
Absolutely, and that's why we are in those chambers. That's what our job is. And the franchise law is there to level the playing field for everyone. We haven't addressed any of the issues that you have to ship your car to Chicago to be repaired. What about all those jobs in Kansas City, in St. Louis, and in between that won't be happening for an auto dealer that wants to come here and have a different set of rules? We don't have a different set of rules for other industries in this state. We have these laws, and we have them to level the playing fields so that everybody's treated fairly. And that's what this is all about, fairness.
Susan Monte, you've been in the executive branch, you've been the state auditor. Was it sometimes tempting for you to maybe pick the laws you wanted to enforce and maybe not be as interested in the others?
Well, it's always tempting, but the real concern that we have is that regardless of whether you agree with what the legislature comes up with, and certainly I don't agree with it a lot, that is where our lawmaking power is. And the law on these car manufacturers and dealers is that very clearly manufacturers can't sell direct to customers. They have to sell through a dealer. So what's happened here is the Department of Revenue has found a way to let Tesla have a dealer license. And it takes a pretty strong analysis of the rules in order to make that happen. And I think one of the things that you talked about with Senator Kehoe is that the Department of Revenue has a history of making some kind of interpretations in ways that the legislature didn't intend, whether it was scanning ID documents for concealed carry or the fee office kickback of fees for bidding contracts that Senator Silvey and Senator Walsh are carrying. So we've seen this with the Department of Revenue anyway.
Representative Dogan, the transportation thing's interesting. Senator Kehoe's been a leader in that. He had a plan. It did not pass last year. You weren't part of making that plan. You're a freshman legislator. You just came into office. Do you see problems in transportation, and any part of what the senator said appeal to you about how to solve them?
I definitely think the need for transportation upgrade in Missouri is real. It's one of the few things that I think we do have a legitimate state government purpose for, unlike a lot of the things that the state legislature tries to spend money on. So I think that we do need to, going forward, look at different ways to find a solution for that funding. And I'm open to all the different solutions that have been put on the table. I think the sales tax is pretty much dead in the water. The voters spoke pretty loud and clear on that. But other ways, we've got to look at those and see if they make economic sense.
So this week, busy week in the legislature. Senator Walsh, across the chamber, the House passed right to work. I assume that you've got your tennis shoes on, ready to stop any right to work bill that was passed.
I have. Not to share with you my legislative strategy for the floor.
Oh, just with us, just
but
among friends.
Just
here.
among friends. But I'll say this: states that have passed, it's proven that states who have passed right to work laws, their household income is over $500 more a month less. They spend over $3,000 less on each child in education. It's an unfair law. I thought when I went to the Senate that I would be in a place where we didn't make laws that were addressed to 12% of the population in this state. We have a lot of important things to do there in that building, and I don't think this is one of them. And everything I've read since yesterday, I don't know how much of an appetite there is in the Senate for this to become law. When we'll see, I'll have to tell you this, I do not read these bills till they get to the Senate, because Senator Sylvie can tell you, our workload is very heavy. So I know what these laws say. I kind of have an idea about each one of them that went through the chambers last week. So that's what I will do Monday. I'll start reading up on the bills that will be in our small business committee next week or the week after. They've been assigned, but they have not been noticed up.
Senator Sylvie, I think you have a good feel of the pulse of your caucus. I've heard Tom Dempsey say previously this was not a priority piece of legislation. Do you see that changing this year?
You know, clearly there are people in the caucus that want to see it happen. They'd like to see it become law. But when it comes out of the House at 92 and it takes 109 to override a veto, I mean, I think we're all pretty realistic that even if it passes the Senate, it's going to get vetoed. So if you don't have the strength in the House to override the veto, I don't think it's going to get a lot of time in the Senate.
Representative Dogan, do you see this bill coming back to you with a chance to override it?
That's a good question. I don't know the politics in the Senate that well. I know it passed the House with a pretty strong majority, but as Senator Sylvie said, not a veto-proof one. I supported it because I believe that it is the right thing for Missouri in terms of bringing jobs and businesses back to our state that we've lost to 6 of our 8 surrounding states that already have right to work. I just think we have to have that policy in place to keep us competitive on a national scale.
Susan Mondi, there's been always the discussion of this. I don't think it's a realistic thing, most people believe, to override the governor's veto. What about a statewide initiative? You've ran statewide. What do you think the state is on the issue?
Well, I think there is still a continuing place for unions in the state. I think that we recognize the value of being able to get together and collective bargain for workplace safety issues, for wages, and when we take it to the voters in the state, we'll be able to talk about the things that unions still represent. The right to work bills, I think, will be an organizing tool for us. I think people still recognize the value of having a little bit of help for the employees in the state. And if we do away with union representation, it is not a good thing for the state. And as Senator Walsh just told you, the wages are less. There is the states that have right to work are some of the poorest in the country, and we don't want to join them.
You know, one part of this that seemed a little bit missing, there was not a big outcry from employers who have union workforces saying we want right to work to get rid of these unions.
Oh, that's right. In fact, if you talk to some of our employers that have unions in their workplace, they're very happy to work alongside. It is being pro-union isn't anti-business, and it never has been. And it certainly is an ability for the workers to be able to do things in a more efficient manner and in a meaningful way in order to deal with the managers and the CEOs in these companies. So it certainly isn't something anyone's crying out for, except maybe in the legislature.
Senator Sylvie, speaking of doing things in a new, innovative way, you came out with a program to reform Medicaid with a block grant system. Can you explain to our viewers what that is?
Sure. You know, there's been a lot of discussion over the problems that have been created by the Obamacare law, the coverage gap being one of them. And the way that Washington wanted to do this was just expand Medicaid, just put everybody on Medicaid. Clearly, there's not support for that in the legislature. I don't even support that. It's a broken system. It needs fixed. However, I think that if states are given the flexibility to design their own programs on how it makes sense to take care of their citizens, I think that's probably a way forward. And so what I've proposed is we will take care of that coverage gap if you just give us a block grant. Just let us figure out how we're going to do it. Don't say you can have this federal money if you do this or if you do that. Just say, look, we understand you need to take care of your citizens. You need to close the coverage gap. So here, we will help you in doing that and figure it out.
I hear a lot of folks say to me, Republican legislators, we pay the money, we don't like the program, we'd rather not pay the money. We pay the federal taxes, we want the federal benefits. It's hard politically to get there. How do you talk to somebody that's in that spot?
Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinarily political issue. I mean, everything today is governed in the political arena by sound bites. And you take something like Obamacare, and it polls very, very poorly in the states. So therefore, anything I can call Obamacare is going to poll very poorly. So we're still in the process of trying to get to the policy debate. Once we can get to the policy debate and have everybody on the same page that yes, this is a problem and it needs a solution, then I think we'll start talking about more creative answers.
Senator Walsh, every 2 years, people that go out and say they want to expand Medicaid, and people that want to say they want to kill Obamacare go out. Missouri voters elect more of one and less of the other. How do you get around that?
Well, it's interesting. When you call it the National Health Care Act, people think differently about it than when you call it Obamacare. I support Medicaid expansion, but I'm also willing to look. I'm a realist.
What about the senator's block grant
So
approach?
I'm willing to look at anything that will help ensure the nearly 750,000 Missourians that don't have insurance in this state.
Representative Dogan, is that something you feel as some of your colleagues would like to take advantage of the money Missourians are already paying? They're just not quite sure how politically to get that done.
I think a block grant approach is an interesting one, and I commend Senator Sylvie for introducing that. I know he's working hard on this issue. His heart is in the right place, but I just can't go down the road of expansion, and I think that's going to be a tough sell to a lot of my colleagues, mixing those two concepts, block granting and expansion. We like the one, but we don't necessarily like the other.
Interesting. Susan Monty, you're around the state. What do you hear?
Well, I can tell you this. I was, when I came into office, when the first of the significant Medicaid cuts came into play after Matt Blunt had cut 100,000 people off of Medicaid. The real problem was we've now seen what happened with the people who were cut and the shifting of the burden of dealing with the uninsured. So we had more and more people now showing up in emergency rooms for care. In order to balance out the money that wasn't coming into the hospitals, they had to renegotiate different rates with insurers, which then gets passed to the rest of us who have health insurance, and that's a real big part of why we have to have some kind of health care like the Affordable Care Act. When we come to Medicaid expansion, though, we can look at it in this state and see we've got $2 billion of tax money that is going to other states if we don't expand. And what we're just trying to do is put some of those people who were cut off.
And we'll have to leave it there with cutting those folks off. I'm sure the debate will pick up next time. And that's it for this week in Missouri Politics. We'll see you right back here next week.